Hey, I'm Stephanie, and it's time to talk about the Natasha Denona Golden Palette. To be honest, I had prepared an entire review. I purchased this palette with my channel's budget, and I have been diligently testing it. I've recorded swatches, comparisons, discussions of the formula, the whole shebang, and I can still make that video if you wanted. I have so many notes. But there are already so many detailed reviews out there. I'm not sure that adding my voice to their chorus is entirely necessary, at least not when it comes to things like the quality and the color story. I mean, it's Natasha Denona. The woman makes beautiful eyeshadows. I've tried it. It's rad. Use my affiliate link and my discount code, yada, yada, yada. But I do think I might have some interesting things to say about this palette that might not be discussed in a typical review. So in today's inside out, upside down review of the Natasha Denona Golden Palette, I will attempt to answer questions like, is Natasha Denona ruining her eyeshadow palettes by doing things like going clean and cutting out preservatives from her formulas? Because based on the number of comments and messages I got expressing exactly this sentiment as a response to the video that I first made when the palette was released, it kind of gives me the feeling that people want to discuss that. So we will. And I think you might be surprised at the answer. But we'll also be asking, is this very monochromatic color story a tragic miss or a genius move? Let's start with that second question first. When I look at this color story, I see browns, I see beiges, I see varying shades of gold, and a lot of these shadows look very similar. I can see that there are some slight differences in the undertones and the nuances, but although they're pretty, these shadows are all very same. No matter what, you're always going to get a golden neutral eye out of this palette. You can get a matte version of that, a sparkling version of that, or even, if you use the one dark shade in the palette, a smoky version of that. But ultimately, it's always going to look pretty similar. Case in point, I have completely different shadows on each of my eyes today. I used the Golden Palette to create both of these looks. I have a different brown in each crease, I have a different gold on each mobile lid, and I have a different highlight shade on each inner corner. The question is, did you notice the difference? If the answer is yes, I would say you have an exceptionally good eye for nuanced color. But I think if we're being honest, most people probably wouldn't notice the difference. I think some people are going to argue that those similarities are a weakness that makes this palette a tragic fail. And you know what? If you don't like browns, beiges, and golds, then this palette is definitely a tragic fail for you. But if you use these colors every single day, day in, day out, then this palette could very well be worth your dollar for a reason I'm about to get into. But I just briefly wanted to say that if you wanted to save space in your makeup bag or on your vanity, I do honestly think that you could get away with a quad instead of this large palette. For example, I compared the Golden Palette to the new YSL Couture Mini Clutch Eyeshadow palette in the shade 800 over Dore. The quad really is like a distilled version of the Golden Palette. It's even more neutral, if that's even possible, but it offers a sparkling topper, just like Fizzy in the Golden Palette. It offers 2 depths of brown, which is essentially what Natasha's giving you, because you've got Log as your one dark brown, and then you've just got a bunch of mid-tone browns that look very similar on the eye. And then the quad also has a golden metallic shade that is remarkably similar to the shade Aurum in the Golden Palette. I did an in-depth review of this quad, which I'll link in case you'd like to see it, but in essence, the Golden Palette will give you a very similar look. The one main difference that you get with a larger palette is that it does give you several different options when it comes to textures, and it does give you several undertones that you wouldn't get in a quad, but you're ultimately going to get the same look on your eye. It's going to be gold. But here's the reason why I think the Golden Palette might be really worth it for some people. If you have ever struggled with the feeling that your eyeshadow looks quickly become too intense, then one possible solution is to choose eyeshadows that share your own skin's undertone. Because when we use tones that are native to our own skin and hair, then a lot of times we can go more dramatic with the makeup without having it look too extreme. So if your skin has golden undertones, then this palette might actually be a great way for you to achieve a more natural, dramatic look. And in that sense, it's kind of genius because assuming you have golden undertones, a color story like this is going to make it easier for you to create even things like a smoky eye that are a little bit easier to wear. And during this current trend of more natural eye looks, where it seems like most people aren't wearing much at all on their eyes these days, this palette gives golden toned folks a way to enjoy eyeshadow while still following that trend. And in that sense, I do think it's kind of genius because I mean, just look at the success of the I Need a Nude palette. This is the neutral / cool leaning kids version of a neutral palette. Now she's giving the golden girls a chance. And so I'm wondering if perhaps our olive toned friends are next, because the Yucca palette is, I think, very olive toned friendly, but it's not really a neutral palette. It's pretty colorful. But now we come to the more controversial question, and that is Natasha Denona ruining her eyeshadows? People in my comments were claiming that her brand, like so many others these days, is turning clean and therefore her palettes will expire much more quickly. If you've been following my channel for any length of time, you'll know that I'm not necessarily a fan of clean cosmetics precisely for that reason. For example, Dore relatively recently reformulated their eyeshadows to make them clean, and they now only have a shelf life of 6 months. Now, I don't know of anyone who can use up an entire eyeshadow palette in just 6 months, even if they're a dedicated project panner and that's the only palette that they own. As one commenter put it, since Natasha Denona went clean beauty, I'm not interested in paying $70 for a palette that could go bad so quickly. And that's completely understandable. But just like everything in life, this issue is not black and white, and clean means different things to different brands. So let's take a closer look at some evidence to see if we can figure out what's really going on here. Newer palettes like Yucca, I Need a Nude, Xenon, and now the Golden Palette have footers on the packaging, for example, that say, and I quote, "Not tested on animals, paraben-free, preservative-free, D5-free." And I believe it's this addition of preservative-free that has people like the commenter I mentioned worried. So I decided I would take a closer look at the ingredients. What you have to keep in mind in the upcoming discussion is I am not a cosmetic chemist. I'm not a chemist at all for that matter. So I'm basically just taking the information that I have been able to research on these ingredients and using that as a basis for conjecture. So what I am saying should not be taken as immutable fact. I'm looking at it more as a jumping off point for how we can begin to think about the marketing that brands use and how we can better inform ourselves to make purchasing decisions that are more in line with what we actually want. When I really take a close look at this packaging, it feels like there's about 10,000 different ingredients in here. And that's probably just because these names all look like gibberish to a layperson like me. So I figured to keep things moving and a little bit more interesting, I'm just going to focus on 4 ingredients that seem to be in every single one of Natasha Denona's newer palettes. And that way I think we can get a feel for more of what's actually going on here. And now I'm going to have to refer to my notes because there's no way I'm going to remember these names. I am intimidated just looking at these names. I'm going to butcher their pronunciation, so I'm not even going to really try. But today we're going to talk about caprylyl glycol, ethyl hexylglycerin, tocopherol, and this last one's a doozy. Ready? Pentaerythrityl, Tetra-Di-T-Butyl, Hydroxyhydrocinnamate. Try saying that one time fast. Ugh. What did I get myself into? According to my research, cypryl glycol is used as a smoothing agent and a moisturizing agent, but it also has a preservative effect that increases the shelf life of products it's used in. Am I wrong in thinking that sounds like it's a preservative? Then we have ethyl hexylglycerin, a multifunctional cosmetic ingredient with multiple benefits that include improving the skin feel of cosmetic formulations. But it also has a preservative effect, boosting antimicrobial efficacy of other ingredients to protect products from spoilage. Protecting things from spoiling, isn't that the definition of a preservative? Next, we have tocopherol, which seems to be, put quite simply, a form of vitamin E. According to my research, because it's an antioxidant, it can help prevent or slow deterioration from chemical reactions. So If it's helping to prevent deterioration, that feels like it kind of has a preservative function. And lastly, the doozy, Pentaerythrityl Tetra-Di-T-Butyl Hydroxyhydrocinnamate. According to my research, this acts as a synthetic antioxidant and prevents a product's color from changing. So it also has a color preserving function. Do we see a theme here? The question becomes, how can Natasha Denona claim right here in plain text, in black and gold print, that her eyeshadows are preservative-free when they seem to include ingredients that have a preservative function? Once again, this is pure conjecture on my part because I don't work for an agency like the FDA or the European Council. But I suspect that this all might be a matter of bureaucratic definitions because, for example, according to my admittedly very hasty research, ethyl hexylglycerin is not listed as a preservative according to European regulations, at least. And I'll link my reference in the show notes in case you want to look that up. But I would guess that if the law doesn't consider an ingredient a preservative, then cosmetic companies don't have to list it as one either. And in a way, that kind of makes sense to me because humans have been using things like sugar and salt and sawdust to preserve food for centuries and doing so safely. And we don't think of sugar as a preservative, at least I don't. So I don't necessarily have a problem with that. Another reason they might be able to say that this formulation is preservative-free might be, and once again, this is just conjecture on my part, but it might be because several of the ingredients in here seem to serve multiple functions. And so I'm wondering if the primary function of a certain ingredient is to, say, influence the skin feel of the eyeshadow, but not to extend its shelf life, then perhaps that preservative function is simply considered a happy accident, a convenient coincidence. And because it's not the primary function of the ingredient, it doesn't necessarily need to be listed as an official preservative. So yes, the packaging does now officially state that this formulation is preservative-free. But for those of us who are mainly concerned with the product's longevity, I think the more relevant information on the packaging is this right here, and that is the product expiration, which is still 24 months. And that's the same as it's always been. So Natasha has not pulled a Dore on us and given us a brand new palette with an absurdly short shelf life, which I am very thankful for. I suspect this whole preservative-free move was a purely marketing thing. I have a feeling her people know that clean, whatever that means, is in right now. And so they're trying to capitalize on that by adding preservative-free to the packaging. So if the only reason you're avoiding the Golden Palette, or any of Natasha's new palettes for that matter, is because you're afraid that they're going to expire quickly, based on this information, that little 24-month sign right on the packaging, I don't think you have to worry. But as always, each of us has to individually decide what's best for ourselves, our health, and our wallet. So I have a couple of questions for you. One, if you were considering this palette, was the whole clean factor a consideration for you? And number two, is this palette on your wish list? Did you already pick it up, or is it an easy pass for you? To be honest, this would have been a pass for me had I not purchased it for my channel. Don't get me wrong, when the Golden Palette was first announced, I was obsessed with the idea of it. But you know what I did? I simply started using my gold palette, the original one, every single day. And I realized I enjoyed it so much that if I were to purchase the Golden Palette for my own personal collection, it would just diminish the joy that I already have in this. So I had actually decided against this. What made me change my mind was the general level of interest in this, and I thought it might be good for the health of my channel to review it. But now that I have both, do I think that it's worth having both? And for me anyway, the answer is definitely no. I only have one face. I can only wear so much gold at one time. Had I not planned on making specific content with this, I would not have bought it. But of course, the main reason for that is because I already have the original gold palette. For those people who really wanted this palette and couldn't get it, you're in a different category because this is the closest thing you can get to this. So then maybe it's worth it. As I mentioned before, I do still have all my notes to do a thorough review of the quality and colors in this palette, and I'm happy to make that for you if you really want to watch it. As a very small creator who doesn't receive products in PR before their release, I'm not sure how much sense it makes for me to put up a late review of this palette, at least not from the perspective of my channel's health. But if it's something you really want to watch, then throw me a star emoji in the comments so that I can make it just for you. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. But even if you don't, I hope you have a great week, and we can all remember that even stumbling can be a form of moving forward. So let's stumble in style.